suppose one of the things that I've been thinking about in terms of art education was about the fact that we're in an art school that's part of a university, which is perhaps different to how art education kind of started out. And I kind of wondered what you thought that sort of made happen, or whether you feel that changes what art education can be, given that we have to have a kind of parity in terms of assessment and standards and what have you that matches with physics or with social work or with any of those other things. Whereas in the old art schools, perhaps it existed in its own particular.
And it defined itself as a result, didn't it? Art school was a self-contained context. I mean, universities innately are conservative. They have to be. I think that's a real question. Because one of the things, it sort of links probably to one of the questions I might ask you, is about mobility. Is how much can a course move academically or physically within a bigger institution?
It feels like I feel my job as a kind of art lecturer is to kind of hold open a space. And that weirdly there are things about being in the university that kind of make that possible, because there's possibly access to those things, and there are bigger
networks,
other outside things that you can connect to, and possibly it means there's more money around than maybe there would be if you were just in a kind of tiny art school where there's a miniature library and a kind of, you know, there's only a few hundred students, whereas here there's massive and masses. And the university is constantly, whatever the talk of innovation and creativity and all of those kind of things, fundamentally suspicious of all of those things. That it wants them, but it kind of wants them after they're already proven. It doesn't want them in terms of there being a messy space where sometimes things do go wrong and risks are taken and they don't pay off. It likes talking about risk taking when it's all neat at the end and everything's fine.
But do you think there's a difference then between what were those generic terms which any institution has to deal with about learning transferable skills? Do you think there's a separate language within fine art? Is it different to other courses within the university? In that a lot of those things are, I would say, first nature to the subject.
Who are we educating? Is it about educating people to go out into the world and to go out and get jobs and do all of the things that any university graduate should be able to do? Or is it, are we educating artists? Are those two things mutually exclusive, or can they both exist kind of together? In terms of this idea of sort of holding open a space, I kind of want to make it that the students themselves define what it is that they want to know. And actually what I've seen from like quite a lot of other courses that are nothing to do with fine art is that they wish that their students had the kind of the desire to learn for themselves, in the way that I would say a larger proportion of fine art students come with that expectation. Even now, even with different sort of changes in prior education, where to some extent that has been kind of beaten out of people by the necessity to meet certain criteria.
Well, the national standards, aren't they? Which is under review, I know it is.
John Baldessari talks about how there was an art school where people could go, and if they sort of met the criteria in a year or 2 years, they graduated. And if they didn't in 6 years, then they were kind of still there. But that there was or even perhaps that people might choose to stay on. It's not about the qualification. 7 years of
education at different levels. Inevitably, you take a sort of trying to get a feel for something in an art school. You know what students are up to. You know what the staff are providing. You know what facilities. I mean, we were talking outside about, do you buy more HD projectors and Blu-ray, or do you buy a bag of clay or 600 pencils? And how does that work? I think students will just adapt. I mean, wonderfully, always adapt to those situations. The interesting one for me over the last 5 years is how the management of art's become part of art school, whether it's cultural, creative industries, and how art's managed, but the students are doing it. Running spaces,
kind of professional
projects, etc., etc. The thing that I suppose, from my own point of view, I get most nervous about is this. How would you describe it? It's like a generalised indifference
from current students.
Yes, which sort of makes you feel very unpolitical. unpoliticised, that they can't make a difference, they can't actually interact or engage beyond, and the art school means absolutely everything there, because that's the only context.
In the present system, by the time you get to third year, you're expected to sort of suddenly make all of that experience into something that looks like art. Was that what people end up doing is what they think they should
Absolutely,
be doing.
no question.
Because
The anxiety
what's
about a degree
allowable
show is, for me, for 80% of the students, not appropriate. What's appropriate is a process